Looking like a good Sunday here. 9-game main slate across the site. SuperDraft and sponsor Yahoo will be going with all of the games because that is what they do. But we've got a good little show lined up for you here. It's your old pal Emac and Greg Ehrenberg, the Sunday MLB pair, and we finally get to go at noon. The gentleman's hour. I was able to go write my articles, do my stuff, take a dog for a walk. It was a good morning. And now here we are, Greg, and we've got most of our lineups too.
Yeah, it was a better chance of us getting most of the lineups today because with the 9-game slate, the way it shakes out, all the games are 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock games. So actually, I think it kind of makes for a better sweat also watching the games. Like, it's kind of cool to have all of the stats kind of happening at the same time, as opposed to the situation where, you're waiting for the 10 o'clock games or whatever later in the day. So I like when it's a condensed schedule and all the games go off at the same time.
Yeah, it definitely makes it a lot more fun and enjoyable. I remember, God, when DFS NFL first started and they included the Monday games on all the slates. I mean, you had to wait forever, and if you were losing or winning, you couldn't change anything. It was horrible.
And the funny thing too was when they started taking those games away, people started complaining. But then when they added them back at one point, people complained again. So it was kind of a thing where, which you kind of realize too, like people join Twitter just for the sole purpose of being upset online at something or another. It's really it's really an odd platform to where people really are just on Twitter to be unhappy, which is kind of what I like about it at the same time also.
Yeah, you and Adam have that. You revel in other people's
oh, it's fantastic.
Foolishness.
Oh, it's fantastic.
I tend to wear things on my sleeve more often than not, so it makes me depressed if I read it too much. So I try to limit myself, and I try not to look at it before bedtime because you'll just realize that everybody is an idiot, or so it would seem. And it's hard. That makes me sad because I'd like us all to get along and be happy together. Let's see. We've got my placeholder lineup's missing a ton of people in it. No James Donaldson. Looks like Tasco Hernandez out.
Yeah, Hernandez is on the injured list.
Yeah, that was a little button mash fun there for me. But we're gonna go game by game here. So let me call up some stuff. We'll hit on the 9 games on the main slate. Around lock, we'll probably talk about that nice 4-game afternoon slate. I've done some research and such for that. We've got a bunch of articles free. We've got the pay content behind the paywall, and we've got all sorts of goodness going on. So let's jump right in here. We are gathering of the tribes, but we've got the Yankees going against Baltimore. Baltimore, the lone holdout here for our lineup. I don't think that's going to impact us a ton, because this looks like a good spot for Tanaka. Anthony Santander went on the disabled list. It looks like Renato Nunez is dinged up. So we're looking at a very, very traditional September lineup from the Patters of Birdland here. Take it away, Greg. What are we doing with Tanaka? Because we got 4 spendy pitchers we want to spend on. Is Tanaka an SP2?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm sure, as you know by now, I always tend to go up to some of those more expensive pitchers that I think are in good spots. So I'm going to be much more focused on looking for value offenses to jam in lineups with, Bieber and DeGrom in them. I'll have Tyler Glass now mixed in also. So Tanaka's in an okay spot. He overall hasn't been very good this year, though. And as bad as the Orioles offense is on paper, Camden Yards is still a pretty favorable hitter's park, and it's a place that's difficult to pitch in sometimes. And the one bugaboo for Tanaka over the last few years is that when he doesn't pitch well, he tends to give up home runs. So I do worry a little bit with him pitching in Baltimore. That and his pitch count hasn't always been all that high this year. So as an SP2, I think Tanaka's okay, but he's not a priority play for me, and no interest in the Orioles offense. Regardless of who ends up being in or out, we don't have a lineup right now. It doesn't matter. I'm not rostering them.
All right. Interestingly enough, I pulled together yesterday morning all of the scoring by stadiums. And I was just kind of curious because I wanted to prove out my San Francisco Giants corollary theory, crackpot idea that they're using juice baseballs there. So the Rockies, Coors Field's number 1. They've got
shocking.
And this is heading into yesterday, so it doesn't include yesterday's numbers. But 21 games, they've scored 120. Their opponents 162. That's a 13.4 average. Number 2, San Francisco Giants. They have scored 5.7. Their opponents 5.6, 11.3 runs. All the way down is the Orioles, 9 in Camden Yards this year, 9.2. mostly by the opposition. 5.2 for the opposition, 4 for the Orioles. The two lowest, three lowest, I guess. Nationals, 7 runs per game combined. The Cubs, 6.8. And the Twins, 6.2. That just reminds me, and I was going over this with T. McBee as well, that just reminds me that says, hey, let's think about this for a moment. It is still a pretty small sample size. Because if we think about the Twins and the Cubs, I would expect to see that a little higher. So it's just a reminder that in San Francisco, even if they are using juice baseballs, it's still a small sample size.
One note on Wrigley, though, is they did redesign the stadium to make wind less of a factor this year, which kind of goes both ways, right? Because there's some days where the wind would be really strongly blowing in, where you'd be like, oh, Kyle Hendricks is pitching, and nobody's going to hit the ball anywhere against him because he puts the ball in play, and the wind's just going to knock everything down. And then the other thing goes the other way also. There's some days where the wind would be blowing out like crazy at Wrigley Field, and it's like every pop-up becomes a home run now. So that's just overall going to mitigate the weather effects on Wrigley. I think it did tend to have more days where the wind would blow out than blow in. But yeah, that's something just interesting also about Wrigley also.
Yeah, and Texas was the other one that was fun to look at there because they have a brand new stadium. Now, granted, 19 games is all that they've played there, but they're averaging 3.5 runs, the opposition 4.7 for a total of 8.2, and that's one of the bottom 6. So that's kind of interesting as well. But they're playing not in the Texas heat anymore because they have that roof. So it's one of those things that was kind of just interesting to see. And there's no good way to pull this information. I had to cobble it together from a few different FanGraphs reports. There was nothing on Baseball Reference. And then I even had to type in by hand to figure out how, by looking at each team's record to see how many games they'd played at home. It's like literally with all this data, I can't just query it somewhere and get this, and surprisingly not. You can get park factors, but it doesn't have the raw underlying numbers. So I wanted the raw underlying numbers.
Yeah, FanGraphs used to have a page where they used to have it all up, but I think it just kind of like stopped getting posted 2 years ago, and I don't know what happened to it because there used to be a page that I used to visit, and I've looked for it a couple times this year, and it just doesn't exist on the internet anymore.
So anyway, a little bit of fun there. All right, for those of you just coming in, go ahead and hit that like button. We do appreciate it. So there will be a live before lock NBA show at 2:30 today. That will be with Zach and Josh Engelman, so you'll want to check that out. And then reminder that we also have, we're sponsored here by Yahoo. They have posted their Week 1 NFL contest. They have the $500,000 baller. It's a $10 entry, 150 max. And they have CSV upload and CSV edit, something they did not have at the start of last year. So that is definite improvements over there. Go ahead and check that out. They didn't post that until, I think, 4 days ago. Even with the 150 max, I will be shocked if that gets more than 70-80% full. So, be prudent. Utilize your bankroll wisely. Try to find some of that overlay. It's a good thing to do on week 1. All right, on to our next game here. This one is one of the pitchers I really, really like. So I think Shane Bieber is my number 1 pitcher of the day. He's going against the Brewers. This one is in Cleveland. We have in the mid-70s, 50% humidity, and no real wind to speak of. If we're looking at Nola and DeGrom, they're kind of going against each other, which hurts the win share for both of them. And then that, for me, elevates Bieber to number 1. Depending on your side of choice, Glasnow's in there for the strikeout upside in the matchup against the Marlins. A decent chance at a win as well. But for me, Bieber's going to be my top pitcher of the day. How are you breaking down this game?
Yeah, in the first build I did, Bieber is the pitcher that I have the most exposure to. I'll be doing updates once we roll along during the show, but I still assume that Bieber is going to be the highest owned pitcher for me. Like something really crazy would have to happen for me to feel otherwise. A lot of people might look at this and assume the Brewers are kind of a tough matchup, which I talked about the other day when Carlos Carrasco pitched against the Brewers, but it's not the case. They have a 77 WRC plus against right-handed pitching, and they have a 27.2% strikeout rate against righties, which is the second highest in the league against righties, only behind the Tigers right now. So not only has Bieber been ridiculous this year, he averages, what's his 33.8 DraftKings fantasy points at this point in time. This is either like the first or second best matchup you get for a right-handed pitcher. The Brewers have not been good against righties this year. They have a really thin lineup. And even at the top where it's like some of the bats are to be feared, like Christian Yelich isn't having a very good season relative to Christian Yelich expectations. So this is a pretty easy lineup from top to bottom for Bieber to go up against. And given how well he's pitched this year and that he hasn't really stumbled either. I mean, he had the game against the Twins where he was kind of iffy, but he still scored, what was it, 29 DraftKings points just because he gets so many strikeouts every time he pitches. So even if he's going poorly and gives up like 3 runs or something, I mean, he's striking out like 11 guys anyway, so it doesn't matter. He's just been ridiculous for fantasy.
All right, I'm looking here at so we got some cool stuff over here at Awesemo. We have if you go to awesemo.com, look across the top. You're going to see that we have season-long NFL content, best ball content. That is up there for you guys. Now, we have the Awesemo podcast page. We've got Odds Shopper, which I'm going to talk about here. It's a place where we compare half a dozen different half a dozen different sports books. And the page I like to go to is strikeouts by pitcher to get some of these pitcher props here. So today's pitcher prop for Shane Bieber is 8.5 strikeouts. Would you like to be over or under that?
Probably over. I think that there could be a little bias right there just because people see the Brewers name there. But just based on what I said before about how high the Brewers strikeout rate is against right-handed pitching, I think it's pretty hard to not think that Bieber gets a bunch of strikeouts. And then also, let me look at his strikeouts per game this year. 9, 10, 11, 11, 8, 8, 13, 14. So, I mean, literally 8 has been his floor this year. And he's gone over way more times than he's gone under. So 8.5, the over seems like a good play to me.
All right. So Odd Shopper, what that does is it allows you to not only shop the best line, but also see all of the different player props and futures and in-game betting and all that fun stuff throughout the different sports books, so you can find some different edges. For those of you that are in states that you cannot wager, like me, it's legal. They just haven't set it up yet for Virginia. Let's keep dragging our feet. They say it's not going to be till next year. It's like, really, guys? Really? But in any event, I like to look out for some of these player props. So we also have a free article here. This is the Milwaukee Miami game. It's by Zach, who's going to be on the show with Josh later this afternoon. But he's talking about the different betting trends that you can look at here, both from a spread, a point total, etc. So if you go over to that page, you're going to find at least one, if not more, free articles each day. Sometimes they'll put up the Gen bet of the day and some goofy stuff like that as well. So it's fun to read, even if you can't always participate in it. But we do have deals with the majority of these sports books. So if you come in through us, you're going to get some nice little bonuses. But you can figure that out by when you click on it and see those pages. All right. Last one for this game. Brett Anderson. What do you think his strikeout over-under is?
Oh, geez. 3.5?
2.5.
Okay. I wasn't that far off. I would assume it's 2.5 though, with like a pretty significant minus money on the over.
You are correct. Minus 135.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, Brett Anderson just doesn't strike guys out. He has, I mean, last I looked, I didn't look too much into his numbers for today just because he's not something I consider for DFS because he doesn't strike out anybody. But last I looked, I think I remember him striking out something like 4.5 hitters per 9 innings or something really, really low. So I mean, the number's low enough that I wouldn't feel comfortable taking the under on a strikeout prop either, just because that, I mean, it's hard to confidently say he's only going to strike out 1 or 2 hitters over the course of the start. But easy enough for me to say that I don't have interest in rostering Brett Anderson in DFS, which also, not to belabor the point too much, but the other thing is, even if you are in a state where you can't bet, like you said too, it's still good to look at the player props because they have utility for DFS, right? Like football is coming up next week. There's value in looking at the rushing total yards for individual running backs, just seeing like, oh, which guys am I maybe not considering that are projected for a high total rushing yards? Which guys are projected to score touchdowns, right? Because sometimes there'll be guys who they have, pretty favorable projections to score a touchdown by the sports books. So it's always a good way to go about building lineups for DFS also.
All right. My apologies. We was chat saying we didn't cover the new Baltimore pitcher. I had a fun joke about Kramer and Kramerica and stuff like that. But we've got Dean Kramer. He's a fringe top 10 prospect here. He is making his debut today. Came to the Dodgers as part of the Manny Machado, or came from the Dodgers as part of the Manny Machado deal. Do you want any part of him going against the Yankees? I personally don't, but he'll still be like a 5 to 10% guy for me, just because I'm going to need some flexibility for some salary cap, because I really want to get the White Sox in, as they are my number 1 stack, but they're incredibly expensive.
Yeah, so I agree with you that I like the White Sox. However, just because of the pricing, the way I generally build my lineups, I'm going to be way underweight to the field on them. And then I just don't have interest in Kramer as a pitcher, even though he has. I mean, he's not really a highly regarded prospect, but I guess maybe somebody who could be okay. It's still he's going up against the Yankees. It's a tough matchup. It seems no matter who puts on the pinstripe uniform, like it could be Luke Voigt. Luke Voigt was literally a guy who was who was DFA'd like 3 years ago, comes to the Yankees and he's one of the best hitters in baseball all of a sudden. So it's kind of this weird thing where whatever it is with the Yankees, you put them in that lineup and it almost doesn't matter what the name is on the back of the jersey. The name on the front of the jersey is almost more important. I mean, DJ LeMahieu, right? They turned him into like a top 5 MVP candidate. He was solid in Colorado, but not nearly as good as he's been in New York. So it's a really tough matchup going against the Yankees. And there's so many good pitchers on the high end that I just don't have any interest in Kramer. I think as a stack, the Yankees are okay because when you get to the bottom of their lineup, it's really, really cheap. Like beyond DJ LeMahieu and Luke Voigt, every player on the Yankees is priced under 4,000. So if Kramer's going to struggle, maybe he has some jitters because this is his first big league outing, then maybe it doesn't matter that some of the hitters all the way at the bottom of the Yankees lineup aren't necessarily big power hitters. They might just do well because it's a young pitcher coming up in the big leagues.
Yeah, and he's kicked around the minors for a while. He had 1 year at UNLV. He had like a 5 ERA, which is college, whatever. But he's pitched in 16, 17, 18, and 19 in the minors here. He has 11 strikeout per 9 across 356 minor league innings, so that's nice. But it's not going to be an easy matchup here. Plus, he's just been at the alternate training site, so simulated games, no match for coming in and making your very first start against the Yankees. So there we are on that one. All right, let's get on to game number 3 here. Let's see, we've got, here's the pitching. Nola and DeGrom. Where do you think the field's going to land on these guys?
Let's see. What do we have for projected ownership for them right now? I'll say for me personally, I much prefer DeGrom just because they're at similar price points, and I view DeGrom as a better pitcher than Nola. I'm still gonna have Nola in my player pool, but I'm gonna be way heavier on DeGrom, and I'm gonna be way heavier on Bieber than I am on Nola. The offenses, I think we could pretty comfortably stay away from in this spot. And the other thing with Nola too is the 10,300 price tag is pretty steep for him, especially just when, like I mentioned, there's other guys on the slate. And if we want to go a little cheaper, Tyler Glass now at 8,700 as an SP2 also makes some sense. So Nola's okay, but DeGrom the much preferred option to me.
All right, we actually have hefty field on Nola. Pardon me, on DeGrom. Oops, that's points. He is 42% right now. Glasnow's 50. Bieber's almost 60. Nola is 13. So well down the list there. So we'll have to see where the leverage plays out. But that's going to make it interesting because DeGrom is 3 times as popular.
Yeah, I think Nola makes sense as a leverage play, but just in a vacuum, DeGrom is still the stronger play to me and the guy I'm gonna have more exposure to. I'll have Nola in my player pool, like I said, but I just like DeGrom more. There's certain times where I'll look at the ownership, and if I think all things are similar for the guys, I'll just go with the guy who's lower owned. But that's not really how I feel about these two. I just think DeGrom's a much better and much more consistent pitcher than Nola.
All right, and free today is the MLB projections. So I'm going to drop that link in there. Again, you guys can find that over at Awesemo. Up at the top, go to the menu bar, go under MLB, and pick, wait for it, player projections. All right. Any hitters at all in this game? And I've got to ask because it feels like potential leverage here for some of the Phillies, or is that a fool's errand today?
I think it's a fool's errand just because they're not even that cheap. Like if there was really cheap hitters that we could stack and say like, hey, we could get a lot of value by stacking against DeGrom and then play like Bieber and Glass now or Bieber and Nola together. But Rhys Hoskins is 4,800, Bryce Harper 6,000, Didi 4,300, Segura 4,500. So even stacking them, it's just not a good per dollar proposition. And then there's just other really cheap offenses that aren't going to have much ownership that I think are in better spots.
All right. Anything else you want to mention on this one before we move on?
No, not really. It's kind of nice looking at the slate because for me at least, it's pretty clear in terms of there are these pitchers I really like, and then that makes it just there are a bunch of offenses I don't like.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of narrows my player pool down a lot to the point where it's like I know what I'm going to be rooting for today.
All right. This is an interesting one. I was ready to really recommend the Braves, but Pat Corbin is not getting any popularity here. He's going to be maybe coming in around 10%. He has not been good so far this season. Strikeouts are down. His strikeout prop today is, I want to say it was 4.5 or 5.5, which is pretty low for someone of his skill set. But the Braves are expensive. It's not the best matchup by any stretch, and we're not getting leverage for them. Do you still want to look towards the Bravos here?
I have a moderate amount of interest in them, but not necessarily serious interest. As for Corbin, I don't have any interest in him as a starting pitching option. Even though the Braves have actually struggled against left-handed pitching this year, they only have a 78 WRC plus, so that's made them one of the worst offenses in the league against left-handed pitching. Like, if I had any interest in this game, it would probably be betting on the Nationals as a fairly significant underdog in this game, just because the Braves haven't hit left-handed pitching well. Josh Tomlin's on the mound for Atlanta. It's not necessarily that I look at Washington and just be like, oh, like they're a lock to win or anything like that. It's just that I think the line's a little bit off. Like, I just think as much as Patrick Corbin has struggled relative to Patrick Corbin expectations, I still think he's a much better pitcher than Josh Tomlin. And I'm not convinced that the Braves offense against left-handed pitching is any better than the Nationals offense against right-handed pitching. So for that reason, I just think the line's a little bit off in this game.
All right. Going to the other side, to the Nationals here. They've got... Sorry, I was sending out the tweet, so I'm assuming you didn't talk about the Nationals. Let me know if you did.
I did not. Okay. I did not talk about the Nationals, but I'll talk about them now. Josh Tomlin, one thing that's kind of interesting about him is he's been a really low strikeout pitcher for basically his entire career. And then this year he's striking out over a hitter per inning. So look at him the last few years, 6.1, 6.96, 5.89, and 5.79 strikeouts per 9 innings. 9.53 this year. He's only pitched 22 innings, so I just assume that's a small sample size issue. There's no reason to think he's going to strike out a bunch of guys going forward. And the other thing is, whenever Tomlin struggles, he gives up home runs. He's a fly ball pitcher with a high home run to fly ball rate. So I look at the Nationals in this spot at relatively cheap prices. Victor Robles is leading off at 2,500 on DraftKings. He's one of my favorite hitter plays. Adam Eaton's batting second. He dealt with, I don't even know what the injury was. He tripped trying to bunt the other day and had to be pulled out of the game. He's maybe the most injury-prone player in MLB. But that aside, the price is too cheap for him in a plus matchup at 3,600. Really, the only guy who's really expensive here is Trey Turner. Other than that, I mean, Brock Holt sitting fifth. He's 2,200. So I look at all of the pitching options that I really like on this slate, and I'm looking for cheap offenses to pair them with. And the Nationals are one that really stands out because I don't think Tomlin's a good pitcher. When he doesn't go well, he tends to give up a lot of home runs. There's a lot of cheap bats on the Nationals. Everything kind of lines up for me to have this team as being one of the core stacks for me, given how I'm looking to construct my lineups today.
Yeah, and that, again, pricing is what it's really going to come down to, because we're going to be singing the praises here of the White Sox. And they're not, I like that the sites price them up. They're not making it easy. Well, except for perhaps, as Terry likes to call the blue site, they make everything easy over there. But in any event, Robles is likely to be very popular, and I think for good reason. How do you do player caps for your position players?
Yes, I do. I don't do it like a blanket the same for everybody, because like a lot of times I'll look at a guy like Robles, and it also depends on what the pitchers are on the slate. So if there's a few individual cheap hitters I really like, and there's expensive pitchers I really want to roster, like DeGrom today, Bieber, then we have to save money at hitters somewhere. So when I see a guy like Robles in a plus matchup, only 2,500, like I don't have a problem with having Robles in like 40 to 50% of my lineups. And then the rest of my hitters, I usually cap somewhere in like the 20-ish% range. But then there's individual hitters I'll go out and be like, oh, I think this guy's a really good value play. He fits into the way I'm looking to build my lineups today. Therefore, I'm going to change the cap on this individual player.
Yeah. Now, do you do that manually, or do you have like it's somewhat automated with formulas?
I just jump into Fantasy Cruncher and just do it. It's hard to do a kind of blanket for every player and do it differently for everybody. There's just individual players that stand out to me as value plays, where I look at the pitchers. And this is something generally that happens also when there's stud pitchers on a slate that I'm trying to jam in, and I'm just really desperate for value. That's when I'll go in and pick out some individual hitters that I really like, and I'll just be like, oh, I want this guy a lot, so I'm going to change his exposure within Cruncher.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And then the other thing, I know you run heavy stack, so that also has a potential of capping a lot of the players just naturally there until you start running without the stack restrictions, like 4-0s or 5-0s on that. All right. Anything else you want to mention from the Nats Braves?
No, I think we covered that pretty extensively.
Then let's continue on. Mr. Tyler Glasnow going against the Marlins. This one is in Tropicana Park or Tropicana Field. Trevor Rogers on the other side. Tiny bit of interest in Trevor Rogers for me. But Glasnow at 8,700 is going to be the play on DK. He's coming in on nearly half of the projected rosters. I can totally see that. This is going to be one of those days where I'll probably run all my pitchers at about 40% and just kind of see what happens for those top end guys, and then the rest of them I'll probably run 5 to 10%, see where that shakes out for this, and that will allow me to, if I don't do that, I will be getting too many expensive pitchers, which is going to cost me the White Sox. I'll still get the White Sox, but it's not going to be the hitters I want. So that's where you got to be careful when the optimizers will do what you ask them to. You may not like the results though. So
no, you're gonna get a lot of 9 hitters that are 2,200 that never get on base.
Yes. Okay, in this one, what is your confidence level in Glasnow? He seems, I say that hesitantly, seems to be mostly stretched out at this point. Mid-season form, whatever platitude we'd like to say.
Yeah, confidence is a weird word to use with Glasnow, right? Because he's been very good.
What is your risk tolerance?
My risk tolerance for him is very high because I'm always chasing upside in tournaments. My confidence level in him is higher than it's been in previous starts this year, which I think is saying something. Earlier in the year, he really struggled with control, like really struggled to throw strikes to the point where the walks were not only an issue, but also the pitch count was an issue, and he was on a pitch restriction. So there'll be a lot of starts where it's like, oh my God, he's through 3 innings and has already thrown 70 pitches. And you just didn't know if he was coming out for the 4th inning or not. And that hasn't been as much of an issue lately for 2 reasons. First of all, the control is much better. He only has 2 walks across his last 2 starts. And the pitch count isn't as much of a factor anymore either. The last few starts, 87, 96, 88, 84 pitches. So we're no longer at a spot where Glasnow is only throwing 60 to 70 pitches. He's throwing full pitches now, and the command is better, which maybe that goes hand in hand, right? As he's more stretched out, the ability for him to throw strikes, he's just there, right? Because he has more innings under his belt, and maybe without the spring training, he was a little rusty. Maybe he was struggling with his command, and I think that could just be chalked up to a lack of reps. And now that he has that, now he's throwing more pitches. The strikes are coming more easily. And look at his last few starts: 33.7 DraftKings points, 38.2, and 21.8. And 2 of those starts were against the Yankees. So now that we see him in a really easy matchup against the Marlins, he's striking out almost 15 hitters per 9 innings. I think the upside is immense for Glasnow. So I'm going to have him as a core part of my lineups just because I can't get away from the upside. As for my confidence level in him, like you said before, that control could rear its ugly head at any point in time. So I don't want to go like 60 or 70% Glasnow or anything like that, just because I'm always a little concerned that bad start is always about to come for him. But on paper, this looks like a great spot for him.
Dakota in chat would like to know, is Dickerson going to hit a home run for the 3rd straight day?
Probably not. Maybe, though. I'll say this much. Let me look at my builds.
And he has 2,900 leading off, so there is... Oh, feels like a revenge spot, too. Oh, pardon me. He's familiar with the Tropicana batter's eye.
All right, I'm loading my... I'm sure I have some Dickerson in here just because of his spot in the batting order and his price. But I prefer Robles. It's being slow to load right now. I'm just trying to give out a number to see what Cruncher spit out for my lineups with Dickerson. I have him... All right, 8%. So, I mean, he's in there as a value play. Definitely, it's a lot more of exposure that I'd have to somebody like that going up against a pitcher I like than normal. And it's just because of what the price is and where he's batting in the lineup.
All right. On the other side, we have Trevor Rogers. He's coming in at $8,000 on DraftKings. Very, very limited major league experience at this point, but he is going against the Marlins, or probably he is going against Tampa Bay. They've sort of been hit or miss this season. We've seen last Sunday was a monster performance by Tampa Bay. We were all fired up for them. What are we thinking this Sunday?
Yeah, so I'm not really interested in the Rays, nor am I interested in Rogers. If we look at Rogers as a prospect, he's not very well regarded. I understand that he's had kind of okay numbers in the minor leagues in terms of strikeouts. In limited innings at Double A last year, though, we did have a 4.5 ERA. Projection systems aren't really all that high on him this year in terms of ERA, nor in terms of strikeouts. And the Rays still have a good offense against right-handed pitching this year. They are seventh with a 111 WRC plus. So this is a tough matchup for Rogers, and I just don't like the price tag. If he was like 5,600 or like 6,000, like the price tags we've seen around guys like Dunning or like Kikuchi in recent slates, then I think you can make a case for him. I can't make a case for him at 8,000 when Tyler Glass now is 8,700.
Yeah, and that's completely fair and makes a lot of sense. Anything else from this matchup?
No, we do have the Orioles lineup now.
Oh,
so,
let's see who came in. Let's circle back there. So we've got Hanser, Alberto, DJ Stewart, Pedro Severino, Ryan Mountcastle, the rookie, batting cleanup, Rio Ruiz, Pat Violaca. Hey, you're still in the league. Mason Williams. Hey, you're still in the league. Brian Alday. Hey, you're still in the league. And Andrew Vasquez. No idea who you are.
It's a bad lineup.
What does this do with Tanaka? Again, does it push him a little bit up?
No, because I expected the Orioles to have a bad lineup anyway. Like, there wasn't a point where I was going to be like, oh my God, the Orioles put out this unknown lineup with like 8 All-Stars in it. Like, that was never going to be the case. So I still have the same feelings about Tanaka. He's okay as an SP2, but there's still a lot of really strong pitching options that I rate much higher than him. And the other thing too is, I mean, 7,600, like last night was only $1,100 more expensive. And given that we do have a bunch of cheap hitters that are in pretty good spots leading off or in other favorable lineup positions, like Victor Robles is 2,500. We talked about Dickerson before at 2,000. So you look at some of those guys, and it's just not that hard to find the extra salary cap to move up to a more expensive pitcher.
All right. For those of you that have not hit the like button, come on, let's hit that like button. Helps us out with the YouTube algorithm there. We're not at 100 yet. We've got over 500 people watching. As Josh Engelman would say, I'm very disappointed. 20%? Come on, let's get up. 25, maybe even 30%. It'll be a nice round number. In the meantime, guys, football is literally right around the corner here. It's not even right around the corner. It's here. So this is your last chance to get in on a really sweet deal. We've got Sleeper is the promo code. And I want to mention to you that you sign up for the monthly Awesemo Pass for NFL. That's for the DFS side. Use the promo code SLEEPER. We'll give you 25% off of that. And this will also include the Awesemo Best Ball and Season-Long Draft kit, which is helpful because we still have drafts going through Thursday. So that will be a lot of fun. I used it last night for my first draft friends and family one. It was very helpful. That was my wife asked me this morning because it was a late night draft. She's like, well, how did it go? And I said, well, according to the Awesemo kit, it went pretty well. We'll see how that plays out because this is just my first one. So we'll see. And no PPR in that league, so it makes it a little hard to get a read on that. But I utilized the Draft Wingman, which was very helpful because I was just clicking off players as they were getting selected. And then it would show me where players were standing out, if I could wait on them, what their average draft position was going to be, etc. So that was very helpful because this was a deep league. It was 14 teams, and we run out of quarterbacks pretty quick. So I wanted to make sure I was going to be one of the teams that was lucky enough to get 3. So that worked out in my favor. But again, promo code SLEEPER. That's for the 1-month Awesemo DFS NFL package. We'll give you 25% off that, and we'll throw in the Awesemo season-long draft guide. All right. I'm ready for this game. This is the game I'm highlighting here. This is Chicago, or pardon me. This is... What happened to my Cincinnati? There we go. Cincinnati Reds. So Chad Kuhl, these are my notes, has been a mess against opposite handers throughout his career. Last 256 lefties that have faced him have a 2.1 home run per 9, a 253 ISO, and a 43% hard hit rate. He's been good against righties. 1 home run per 9, 135 ISO, the 282 ERA shows that the 424 xFIP means he's been a little bit lucky, but he's still not great against righties. Absolutely love Jesse Winker. I'm good with Moustakas. I'm assuming Brian Goodwin did make it in the lineup. He was a recent acquisition for them. He is somebody that is forever overlooked, whether he was getting opportunities with the he's batting 6, getting opportunities with the Nationals and then Kansas City, and then this year earlier it was the Angels, and now he's over here. But he and Winker are great. Goodwin's not afraid to steal a bag here and there either. So I really, really, really like these lefties. I have no interest whatsoever in Chad Kuhl. What do you think about Kuhl and the Reds?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can't disagree. He's not very good against left-handed batters. I was really ready to make a bunch of Red stacks today, but the issue is that those 3 guys are the only lefties in the Rays in the Reds lineup today. So I'll have some exposure to them, except not as much as I thought I was going to ahead of time. Just because, I mean, we see it a bunch of times. And Joey Votto's in the lineup also. We see a lot of times when teams.
Freddie Galvis, come on, he's cheap.
Yeah, he stinks though.
Switch hitter, Freddie Galvis.
He doesn't provide much fantasy upside, but. We've seen the last few years when teams go up against Chad Kuhl, they usually just load up on left-handed hitters. And that was kind of what I was hoping the case was going to be, except it just really wasn't when the lineup came out. So I think that there's some reason to like those individual left-handed batters from the Reds and maybe get a small amount of stocks to them. But it's just hard for me to go really crazy with them given the lack of upside lefties in the lineup today.
All right. How are you feeling about the other side of things here? We've got to mix and match some pitchers. Do you think TJ Antone is going to be one of those pitchers at 6,400 on DK?
Probably not for me. And the issue is going to be the pitch count. He's pitched most of the season out of the bullpen. I actually don't think he's bad. Like his numbers this year are pretty solid. He's striking out well over a hitter per 9 innings. The issue is, let me just bring up his pitch count really quick. I think he threw, was it 60 something pitches his last start? 66 pitches his last start. And then earlier start in the season, where is it? Well, regardless, he hasn't thrown very many pitches this season generally in his outings. He's usually in like the 40 to 60 range around there. So it's hard for me to think that Antone is going to work very deep into the game. And then, like I've said, it's all within the context of the slate also, where there are so many high-priced pitchers that I think should just smash today, that even if Antone's okay and he scores like 12 to 13 DraftKings points, then it's hard to project him for way more than that just because he's going to be throwing limited pitches. That if these high-end pitchers do really well, it's just hard for me to envision a scenario where Antone ends up on the optimal lineup because there's going to be a lot of cheap hitters that do well today also, just because there's so many of them that are in, premier lineup spots. So if you just get a few of those cheap hitters that do well today, it's not going to be hard to get up to the expensive pitchers on the slate. And it's hard for me to expect a really good outing in the context of the slate from a guy who I don't think is going to work deep into the game.
All right. Any hitters that you would consider from Pittsburgh?
Ish. So in terms of, I think that you could make a couple of really cheap stacks just for the reason of they fit really easily with the expensive pitchers on the slate. I don't necessarily expect a ton from them, mostly because I think Antone is okay. And then they're going to face the bullpen after that. And the Reds, it's not like they have a bad bullpen or anything. If we do look at our projections for today, Pittsburgh has the highest percentage chance of being the top value stack on the slate. So I just look at that and them only projecting to have a 3% ownership as a team as reason to get some exposure to stacks them, because I'm much more putting an emphasis on the value today than just the raw points or raw runs scored by an offense because of me trying to once again get up to those expensive pitchers today.
All right. Back to my page here. Again, reminder, our free content for MLB today is the player projections. I'll drop the link there in chat, but you can get that. And then we do at 2:30 have NBA Live Before Lock. Josh Engelman and Zach will be taking you up to the 3:30 tip-off. For those of you that are playing NASCAR this weekend, that's at 6:15 tonight. We have a NASCAR show already in the can on the YouTube channel. And then we also have On the Contrary. Yesterday was the inaugural episode. That was Laffy D steering the ship. Hat tip to Chris Spags, who's now on his next adventure out there at the Vegas Insider. But Laffy capably filling in there with Alex, and then there'll be a rotating special guest each week. So you'll definitely want to check that out. It's just started listening to it. It's also on our podcast feed when I was walking the dog. And then we ran into my wife who was out running. So she walked with us. So I did not get to listen very far into that podcast, but there we are. All right. Next game. Ooh, this is going to be a barn burner, I guess. Robbie Ray, Andrew Triggs. Will either pitcher be gracing your lineups today? They feel like 5 to 10 percenters, and the pucker factor will be high with both of them.
I've kind of given up on Robbie Ray. If I had to roster one of them, it would be Ray, because he just continues to strike guys out. He just does nothing else well so far this year. I mean, the strikeouts have been great for him throughout his career, and he's still striking out 12.32 hitters per 9 innings. The issue is he's walking 8.39 hitters per 9 innings, so 7.34 ERA, and it's hard to even say he's unlucky because he has 7.08 FIP. The issue is that he walks a lot of guys. He gives up a lot of home runs. Those two things added together just equals giving up a lot of runs. Because of the strikeout upside, I think, like you said, it's okay to have Ray in like 5 to 10% of lineups. If I wanted to roster a cheap pitcher that I view as having upside to be able to make those White Sox stacks, Robbie Ray is the way that I'm going to do it. And that's why I also have a very slight amount of exposure to Robbie Ray. Earlier, you asked me about my confidence level in Tyler Glasnow, and I said moderate, right? Like higher than it's been in previous starts. My confidence level in Robbie Ray on a scale of 1 to 10 is it's like -5. He's been so ridiculously bad this year, and he's always been inconsistent in the past, right? He's been a guy who he could get blown up, he could have good starts, and when he has good starts, it's generally very good for fantasy because the amount of strikeouts he gets. And it's just every start sucks now. Like there's just been no upside for him this year outside of that he is getting those strikeouts. So I still view it as like there's got to be one start who puts it together, right? He's cheap every start. He gets a lot of strikeouts. There has to be one start where he just doesn't give up like 8 runs and scores 20 DraftKings points. I've kind of given up on him, but I'm still willing to have a little bit of exposure. So it's not like a total give up to where I'm crossing him out of my player pool. But I'm certainly much lower on him than I was earlier in the season.
It's 47 strikeouts in 34 innings. The real problem is 32 walks in those 34 innings, along with the 10 home runs allowed, because there's base runners on all the time with Robbie Ray.
Yeah, and he just throws nothing in the strike zone and just hopes people swing at it.
All right.
Great spot for the offenses, though, on both sides, especially the Blue Jays. The Blue Jays, 5.81 implied run total. That is, I believe, second highest on the slate behind the White Sox. And the other thing, too, is the prices are just so much cheaper than they are on Chicago. And the implied run total is kind of comparable. Jonathan VR is going to be a pretty popular play. He's at 4,100 with second base and shortstop eligibility on DraftKings. And then you get lower into the lineup, like Tellez, a first baseman with power upside, is 3,800. Joe Panic, who I don't think is terrible, is 3,300. Derek Fisher is 2,200. He's, I think, okay. So there's a bunch of decent hitters with a team with a really high implied run total, and it's pretty cheap up top to bottom. So this is one of my favorite stacks on the slate.
All right. Speaking of cheap, we've got 4 excellent free articles here on the Awesemo MLB page. I'm going to drop the link in for that. You get spotlight hitters and stacks for me. I do a stack for each slate. So we've got the early, the afternoon, and the late slate today. The main slate, the 2 o'clock games, and then the final slate. Terry does 2 different stacks. He does an overnight column where he hits on some of the better, chalkier type stacks, and then his follow-up column the next day covers the leverage stacks by looking at where our leverage or stacks tool is and what we think the field is going to do. And then Austin Barney each day writes a spotlight pitchers play where he highlights a couple pitchers. Sometimes it's the premium guys, sometimes cheap guys, telling you what to do. So that makes a great baseline. I mean, we have lots of good stuff here for our shows, but if you're someone that likes to go in, look at the numbers, see some stats cited, and see some of that information, that's definitely where you want to look. Plus, hey, top of all those articles has a little section with all of the Awesemo current promo codes and deals that we have. So those are free, and there's 4 articles every day. I would stack those up against anything else that is out there around the industry. So we put a lot of time in that, but that's myself, Terry, T. McBride, and Austin Barney that write those. Okay, are you ready for the roller coaster that is going to be Matt Harvey? 6.7 implied run total right now for the White Sox. That seems kind of high. Did this game move to Coors Field? No, no, it did not. What are you doing here?
Well, I have an issue with you calling it a roller coaster game because a roller coaster has to go up at some point to go down, and Matt Harvey
The crooked numbers are going up while Matt Harvey's ego goes down.
Matt Harvey this year, a 14.09 ERA, a 12.02 FIP. He's only thrown 7 innings, so it's an extremely small sample size, but he had a 7.09 ERA making 12 starts last year, and he's just been way over it the last few years. Obviously, at one point was one of the best young pitchers in baseball. A ton of injuries though. He had the thoracic shoulder surgery and was never the same after that. His velocity is not terrible at this point in his career, except his fastball is a lot straighter and it's still down from his fastball velocity is still down from what his peak was, and he just has never been able to adjust to not having the same stuff. The question I have with Matt Harvey, that I've thought about this for a while, if KBO DFS was still a thing and Matt Harvey signed overseas, would you be willing to roster him in Korean baseball DFS?
The answer is no, because he actually tried to get a role over there as well as in
they
Nippon
didn't
League.
take him.
And they both gave him the nah wave. So, not happening. Not happening. All right, chat, put in there what you think your best Matt Harvey description is. Andrew Boudreau has started off, says Matt Harvey is a roller coaster down a mine shaft. That's a pretty good one. It's the leader of the clubhouse right now. Let's see what else you guys can come up with. On the other side, Dallas Keuchel, 8,400 on DraftKings. He gets to go against KC. This will be the second time he has faced them. They strike out a little more than they used to. Problem is Dallas Keuchel not getting many strikeouts like he used to. 4, 7, 3, 1, 4, 8, and 2 in his appearances this year. Oh, and his opening start 1. I'm not seeing a lot of upside here. Do we want him as a 6-innings eater in this type of a matchup? Maybe he gets the win, gets us 17 DK points. Is that worthwhile?
Not at 8,400 when Tyler Glasnow was 8,700. If there was like $1,000 or $1,500 cheaper price tag on Keuchel, I think I would consider him, but not in this spot. Like you said, he is pretty safe because he's not really getting blown up this year. He's pretty low ERA, pretty low FIP, fairly easing matchup. It's just an issue, and he's also very likely to get the win going up against Matt Harvey. It's just an issue of his price tag and the other options on the slate. Getting back to those White Sox hitters though. And it's easy to like them. I get it. And they're the team that I expect to have the highest run total on the slate. Like that all makes sense. Even though the 6.3 run total, whatever it is really high, I can't really disagree with it. Matt Harvey isn't getting anybody out. It's just the price tags and that I like the pitchers a lot. So I'm just kind of hoping that there's one of these cheap offenses also go off because there's just too much opportunity cost for me. I'm not willing to pay up for all these bats and sacrifice not being able to roster the high-end pitchers. I think where I look at this as if I'm going to roster the White Sox and try to fit in the expensive pitchers, I think that there are some guys at the bottom of the line. Like Nomar Mazara is 2,400. I still think Nomar Mazara is a decent hitter, right? Like he's always been a guy who's been somewhat league average with power upside. He's the one guy that stands out to me as being like, hey, if I want to make White Sox stacks, I'm going to have Mazara in it because that is able to save me a little bit of salary. Gilmer Sanchez at 2,900, Mendick's at 3,300. He hasn't been terrible this year. So there are ways to make White Sox stacks that aren't super expensive. When you're making your White Sox stacks, are you just going with all of the top expensive hitters? Or are you mixing in some of those cheap guys at the bottom of the lineup?
So when I wrote it up, I called out Mazara and Mendick as your cheap guys. But I really wanted Yasmani Grandal, and I didn't think he would be, because people don't like to pay for a catcher, but we're projecting him for 35% or 33% or so on DK right now. So that's pretty high. Don't worry about that. I still think he's probably the best play of all of them. I was hoping a little less people would be on that. But you have to remember that because of the way FanDuel works with your catcher, first base, and your utility, you can only roster 2 of the 3 between Abreu, Encarnacion, and Grandal. And then on DK, you can only roster 1 of Abreu or Encarnacion. So it kind of artificially cuts their popularity. And one way, if you think a stack is going to be super high owned, leave out the most popular of those guys, and you can differentiate against other people's White Sox stacks. And a lot of times, this year it's been Encarnacion because he's been discernibly cheaper by about 20% on both sides for most of the year, as compared to Jose. So that's kind of how you can get a little, by going to Jose, you can get a little bit of differentiation within an already popular group of people. And then on FanDuel, people still don't like using Grandal because he's a catcher. He would be a DH or a first baseman. He will be at some point in his career. That's his path. He just happens to be able to still be behind the plate at this point. So, anyway, I think we have one more game, don't we?
So we're on the same page with Mazar. Then I think he's. I'm pretty sure he's the guy on the White Sox I have the most exposure to. Let me look at that to be sure.
How are you compared to Ray? Or pardon me. You were joking with me before. Victor Robles. I had Victor Reyes stuck in my head. Victor Robles leading off. Do you have more Mazara, or I'm assuming more Robles?
I have more Robles for a couple of reasons. Number one, it is a better lineup spot leading off. Then I just am higher on Robles as a player. Like Mazara is fine, right? Like he's a guy who's been slightly above league average for the last few years in terms of WRC plus. But the difference with rostering a guy like Robles is there's just so much more upside. He's been one of the top regarded prospects in baseball for the last few years. He has some power upside. He also has a lot of speed. So he's the type of guy who has the potential to hit a home run, steal a base, and have a massive fantasy game. Whereas Mazar's more relying on hitting that home run. And Robles is just a better all-around player with more avenues to score fantasy points.
Oof, I'm looking at the pitching is, God, it's so top heavy today here. I'm gonna have to go with a little bit more. Casey Miz. What do we want? Let's get to our last game here. Detroit, Minnesota. Rich Hill, incredibly disappointing, but he does have that matchup against the Tigers. He is 7,000 on DraftKings, 10% ownership. I'm going 15 on him. I don't feel great about it. I don't know. He's 40 now, and he doesn't go deep into games. But he's playing the Tigers. These things, something's got to give here.
The Tigers have a really good offense against left-handed pitching. The Tigers have a 128 WRC plus against lefties. That's the third best in baseball. I look at Rich Hill as an aging lefty who I think might kind of be over it at this point in his career. And then I look at the Tigers only projected for 1% ownership today. And given the cheap prices from top to bottom, I think that this is the stack that stands out the most as being the low-owned stack that has potential to win GPPs today. Just based on, like I keep mentioning this, but I have to keep harping on it, is given how good those high-end pitchers are today. If Bieber scores 30 fantasy points, 30 plus, which he does basically every time he pitches, Jacob deGrom scores 25 to 30 DK points, which is a pretty reasonable expectation for him pretty much anytime he goes out, then we're just left in a spot where, all right, a cheap stack is probably what's going to require to win a tournament today. And then I look at the ownership and the upside of these teams. Rich Hill isn't pitching well. The Tigers are crushing lefties this year. The Tigers are cheap and they have no ownership. Like, to me, all those things just kind of line up to it's like I like the Tigers a lot today.
That's very well thought out. I like where you're going with this one. I did not consider it that way, and I'm setting my exposures here as I get ready to hit crunch, and I think you are on to something.
So here, the Tigers have a 129 WRC plus against lefties. The teams that are better, the Astros at a 131 WRC plus, the White Sox at a 152 WRC plus, and that's it. The Tigers have been great against lefties. I think a lot of people just look at the Tigers and assume, hey, their offense sucks. And I'm sure they're not going to continue to be this good against left-handed pitching, but I also don't think they're as bad as the general perception is. And then you look through their lineup. All right, Jonathan Scope is at 4,300. That's not even that pricey, but it's by far the most expensive hitter on the team. Then you find Candelario's 3,700, Miguel Cabrera's 33, Victor Reyes is 34. And you get to the bottom, the guys are like close to min price. I don't know. I like the Tigers a lot today, and the fact that they're only projected for 1% ownership as a stack is just so low that it to me. I just look at it, I go like, hey, I'm gonna play like 10 to. Let's see, what did I have as my number on Tiger stacks? So I have 12% Tiger stacks. It's one of my highest stack teams on the slate. And if they just score like 5 runs against Rich Hill, those lineups are all going to cash, assuming that the top starting pitchers do decently.
I'm officially on board with this one. Wow. All right, so that's we kind of started going on top stacks here. That's I think that's mic drop time. That was well. I really
I mean,
like that.
it's the last game of the slate, so there's might as well drop the hammer there, right?
Yeah, I'm at a loss. I mean, how do we surpass that analysis? Because that is something I think that could be very well the keys to the kingdom for everybody today.
I mean, their 3.6 implied run team total, implied run total, whatever we're calling it these days, is you know what's funny is because I've been doing this for a long time, just like you, where whenever there was a point where remember like sports betting was not allowed at all, so you were never allowed to reference it on any shows you're doing with anybody. So it was always a thing where it's like I never knew exactly what to call it because like any sort of betting references you made on any shows like especially if it was for DraftKings, where like you get dumped out and there would be like you get like suspended from doing shows. So it's still a thing where I have in the back of my head where it's like, oh, I can't say team total. I have to say like implied run total and use like all kinds of other jargon. But anyway, they have a 3.6 implied run total as a team, and that's just way too low. Yeah, I just look at that number and it's just biased against the Tigers. I don't necessarily think that like, oh, the Tigers are a team that's going to score 10 runs today. It's just I think they have a much better chance for upside than their ownership implies. I think they have all right, let me look at the offenses on the slate. So like they're projected for the same amount of ownership as like some of these teams going up against the Aces today. So like the Phillies have 1% projected ownership. What do the Marlins have against Glass now? They're projected for 0.5% ownership. So then I just look at like the 1% ownership from the Tigers, and it's like they're not with those teams. Right? Like they're in a much better spot than teams going up against DeGrom or going up against Shane Bieber. And the prices is about the same, and the Tigers actually hit lefties really well. I don't know. I think this is a good spot for them, and I think that this is a little bit of a price mishap by the books and by sites.
No, I really like this. Okay, I'm gonna make some 5-man stacks here, and then I'm gonna get a little time, so I'm gonna hand build some stacks. They're asking specifically who would you like on the Detroit stack.
So I could actually bring this up, and I'll just say who it is that I roster the most from this team. So I have Miguel Cabrera, Jorge Bonifacio. I have a decent amount of batting sixth. He is at 2,400. A lot of times I end up with cheap catchers in stacks just because it makes sense, right? Because it's hard to get production out of catcher anyway. So if you have a catcher who's like min price, like Griner's 2,100, and it's a lot of times where you get 4 hitters you actually like, and then if let's say the team scores 5 or 6 runs, Griner's going to find himself in spots where he's going to have runners on base. Maybe he gets on base and he's going to have a chance to score runs. And only at 2,100, I mean, you get like 5 or 7 fantasy points from a catcher at that price, and that lineup's sitting pretty good. So I think that he's viable. The priorities for me are Scope, Cabrera, and Bonifacio, though.
All right. They like the Reds. I agree. Let me look and see what I'm going to do with my red stack here. I was not getting enough Jesse Winker. I'm still only getting 19%. I wish that was a little more. I even goosed all of the lefties in that lineup just because I wanted to get more of them, and it's not really working.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about them before. You really like the Reds. I do too. Against Chad Kuhl, focused on the left-handed bats. Jesse Winker, Moustakas is a little expensive, but I think that he's viable. Something you said that I totally agree with is I do think that Brian Goodwin at 3,300 is probably one of the better value plays that's going overlooked for this slate. That, and I think he scored a handful of fantasy points last night. I remember I had a bunch of red stacks that did pretty well, and Goodwin was like 1% owned or something like that. So him at 3,300 makes a lot of sense. A Winker makes sense, like you said. He's one of the more obvious plays from the Reds offense, though, especially against Chad Kuhl. And Winker's kind of sneakily, I think, among the home run leaders this year.
Yeah, he's been having a very good season. He is someone that is all like back when Michael Conforto was with the Reds, just one of those sneaky guys that everybody just continually overlooks. and that's sort of his lot in life at the moment.
So Winker last year had a career best 16 homers. He has 10 this year. So he could very well end up setting a career high in homers in the 60 game shortened season.
That's crazy. All right. Robles or Mazara is the premium chat. I believe we both will say Robles.
Yeah, I prefer Robles. Both are viable. I have a decent amount of exposure to each of them. But like I said before with Robles, the difference between the two is, one, the batting order spot. Robles is sitting towards the bottom of the White Sox lineup. Robles is hitting at the top of the Nationals lineup. The other thing, too, is Robles is just a really young, really highly regarded prospect, and he has more avenues to score fantasy points. To me, Mazar is very reliant on hitting a home run. Very possibly he's going up against Matt Harvey. Everybody's hitting home runs against Matt Harvey this year. However, Victor Robles is a guy who has power. He gets steal bases. And, I mean, he was literally regarded as arguably the number one overall prospect in all of baseball heading into last year. So I think that Robles, due to his age and his acumen, and also just the routes that he has to score fantasy points, combined with the batting order and also a positive spot for him, I slightly prefer him to Mazara.
Yikes. I have Derek Fisher in a bunch of lineups. How did that happen? That's what happens when you have DeGrom, Nola, Glasnow, Bieber.
I don't mind Derek Fisher today, though, especially because I like the Blue Jays as a stack. Just looking at the top stack tool we have at Awesemo, the Blue Jays are not that far behind the White Sox in terms of being projected as the top stack today. The White Sox right now are at 19%. The Blue Jays are at 15%. Those are by far the two teams that stand out in terms of percentage chance to be the top stack. Then you compare the price difference between the two. The White Sox are like, they're so much more expensive than the Blue Jays, right? Like, they're not even comparable in terms of price. So you could stack the Blue Jays and pretty comfortably fit in, DeGrom, Bieber, or maybe Bieber and Glasnow. You don't really have that kind of comfort if you're stacking the White Sox. So I look at that, and I think that the Blue Jays do make for a better stack per dollar in the context of this slate than the White Sox. And Derek Fisher is one of the reasons why. I mean, he's 2,200 on DraftKings, and it's not like he's a bum or anything like that.
All right, 3 minutes before lock. Any regrets? Mine is I don't have enough Red Sox stacks, but I've already uploaded my lineup, so I'm just going to let that one go. Eaton or Goodwin? I would actually go Goodwin. I'm biased against Eaton because the Nationals gave up so many pitchers for him. But I'm going to wear it. The World Series hat, that was all Adam Eaton. All Adam Eaton. He had a phenomenal World Series. I went back and looked at his stats from that the other day. It was so worth giving up those pitchers.
I have slightly more exposure to Goodwin.
Let's see. Brock Holt coming off his 4 hits last night. It's batting 5th at 2,200. Yay or nay?
Yay. I talked about him in National Stacks before. He's a guy I have exposure to. He's not going to get 5 hits again, and he's generally not, particularly great hitter. But, I mean, at his price point, if he gets a couple of hits, it's another one of those guys who's really cheap. It's a good matchup, favorable lineup spot, and it's just another one of those guys that lets you get some of the top pitchers on the slate.
All right. I can try to hand build one last lineup. I've got 2 minutes. I'm going to do a Red Sox stack. Grandal and Mazara, or Pawicki and Wendell. You just wanted me to say Kevin. KP.
Grandal and Mazara.
Let's see here. We got 60 seconds left. Go click on Boston. Let's click on all their hitters. We got to go JD. Got to go Bogey. Got to go Vasquez.
Munoz leading off.
Let's go. Yeah, I've got a ton of him. He's the one guy I've got a boatload of. Let's see if I go Robles in there. Another cheapie.
Yeah, Munoz is in an interesting spot just because he's leading off for Boston against Robbie Ray. We've talked about how bad he's been. And then Munoz also with shortstop and outfield eligibility.
Let's go with the obvious Biebs. Glasnow. Ooh, 3,500 per player. Let's go Mike Ford, batting 5th for cheap. Let's go Joey Wendell, because his name just came up. And let's go Franco. There we are. Did the contest fill? Or did I get in? Oh, I got in. Nice.
Congratulations.
Oh, it says it's full. I did not get in.
Yep. False alarm.
I will enter this contest with it. There we go.
All right. Well, we're at lock.
We're at lock. So, that is it. We've got in an hour and a half, you will get the NBA live before lock. Let's talk a little bit about the afternoon slate and we'll get on out of here. Let's say hit that like button one more time for us. We would really, really, really appreciate it as we do battle with the giant evil algorithm over there. Let's quickly talk the 4-game afternoon slate. I like going against Alex Young with the San Francisco Giants. We do have their lineup. Do not be afraid to pay for Mike Yastrzemski. He has been phenomenal in lefty-lefty matchups. You saw Longoria and Ruff homer last night off of Bumgarner. They're in play today. Ruff is always a pinch hit risk, but he's 2,500, batting 6th. You just need one chance for him to run into one. Those would be the guys I really like. For pitching, I'm okay going with Johnny Cueto. I don't feel good about it. I would be reasonably okay with going with Framber Valdez against the Angels as well. I do not want any part of Jaime Barria going against Houston. Houston hitters I like today would be Kyle Tucker and Brantley. Oh my God, Josh Reddick is 2,900 on DK. That's a steal. He'll probably be batting 2nd or 7th. If he bats 2nd, he'll be very popular. Jordan Lyles, pitching like he's in Coors Field once again. No bueno. Justin Dunn, surprising me. And he gets to go against Texas. He would be my SP2. And then Garrett Richards and Mike Fiers. I'm not a fan of either one of them. They both are carrying 5.2 implied run totals from the opposition. That's also not good. It's going to be 90 plus in Oakland at first pitch. We do not see that very often in Oakland. San Francisco, just out of curiosity, it's going to be 80 degrees there. Anything you want to hit on from that late slate?
You know, it's funny because you said you like Johnny Cueto, and I was pretty prepared to rebut it and just be like, yeah, I never like Johnny Cueto. And then as you went over the other pitching options and matchups, I was like, I guess it's reasonable to like Johnny Cueto on the slate because the other options are pretty garbage. I think I would be a little more interested in Garrett Richards than you.
Okay.
I mean, I haven't dug too deep into that late slate, but here's the issue with Richards. He's had some starts where he's gone really well and they just kind of randomly pull him out in like the 4th inning or something like that at like 65 pitches. But he's still a guy who I think could be relatively decent this year. Injuries has been a huge issue for him. Generally, he's pitched well when healthy. That hasn't been the case so far this year. But I mean, you look at his previous career numbers, he's been a top of the line starter at times when healthy. So then I go down and look at his velocity numbers. And I wonder, has he really lost all that much coming back from all his surgeries? 95.2 average velocity on his fastball this year. He's still throwing really hard. I just think he needs a little bit more reps to be able to really pitch back to the level he was before. I mean, the last full season he was in the big leagues, 2018, and he doesn't really have any full seasons because he gets hurt every single year at some point. But so the last time that he was healthy to start a year, 2018 with the Angels, 3.66 ERA, struck out 10.26 hitters per 9 innings. Walks were a little bit of an issue, which I think is kind of always the case for him at this point in his career. But still, I think he has that type of upside in him, just to where he could be a middle of the rotation starter. And when he's going well, he gets strikeouts. So just given how limited the options are on this league, like we're considering Johnny Cueto a decent play, right? Like the pitching options aren't that good. And I'm willing to bet on Richards potentially starting to figure it out again, just because the velocity is still there.
Yeah, this is going to be an interesting slate because there's eight pitchers. They're between 6,900 or 6,700 and 8,600, and they're all kind of So we shall see. But yeah, for me, it'll be the 4 I'm looking at are Cueto, Valdez, Dunn, and Richards would be the 4th by default. It's a shame. Sorry, Mike Fiers. You have the 2 no-hitters. Not today. All right, gamers. With that, don't forget live before lock. NBA style 2:30, that is coming up. Find out if Giannis is playing or not today. Hit that thumbs up. Let's get to 150. Come on, it's Sunday. Be nice. With that, gamers, good luck.